Good morning, everyone. I will call to order the Monday, April 11th meeting of the Electoral Area Services Committee. I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the unceded and traditional territory of the Comox First Nation, keepers of this land. The first item on the agenda is the RCMP Annual Performance Plan for receipt. Moved and seconded, and I'll move it over to staff.
Delegation today is Inspector Mike Curvers of the OIC of the Comox Valley Detachment, and he's here to provide a brief presentation, I think, and answer any of your questions.
Great, welcome to the table.
Everyone, thanks for having me. It's been a while since we met in person. It's usually Zoom or otherwise. So this is Staff Sergeant Troy Beauregard. He's the ops NCO for our office. So he takes care of all the frontline policing. So he's here to answer questions as well. So I initially sent the quarterly report, which I started last year. And that gives you because our fiscal year goes from April to April, that gives us the stats for the community. That's not what I have up on there right now, but that's one I sent straight to Russell. So the one I have up on there is just a presentation just for the regional district. So we'll kind of go through it quickly. I don't want to spend too much time on it, and then we can open up questions. So the first one is just basically the calls for service, and that goes by month. And you can see kind of a trend that goes up and down, and that's kind of indicative of what we deal with on a monthly basis, the type of calls. And if you can read those little circles, there's numbers in there, and that's the actual file count for the month and the different areas. We'll go into that in a little bit here. So that's calls for service. And then typically for our office, we run around 22,000 calls a year, and that's with Comox, Courtney, Cumberland, and the outlying areas. So the next page, you can see what the breakdown is for calls for service there. So obviously 843 there is Black Creek, and then Cumberland, and goes to Fanny Bay down to Mount Washington, which has 102 calls. So that's kind of the breakdown of calls for service. So we're heading to Black Creek quite a bit. There are some nuisance properties in the area, so we are there quite routinely that we kind of manage and deal with. So we kind of built this presentation around last year's priorities, which if I want to refresh your memory, is traffic, crime reduction, property crime, and organized crime, which is drug trafficking. So if you look at the traffic stats, we did a kind of a 3-year analysis. It's gone up slightly from 2 years ago. So it's not significant. It's not anything we can have to worry about. And those are typical traffic accidents and calls or service we have to attend to. Impaired driving. So we had 20 last year, and that kind of goes up in Black Creek. So that's, again, Black Creek's getting the majority of the calls in the last year. You can see the number of calls for each community and what we're responding to for impaired driving investigations. Break and enters, again, it dropped this year, dropped about 20 files. Part of that is a lot of our clients are incarcerated, so file counts are going to go down. So we've done a good job in getting a lot of those individuals that are causing some issues before the courts. Auto theft, not really significant. It's very minimal. Again, a lot of the property crimes are prolific offenders, and we have a prolific offender management program that we keep on top of to try and keep these individuals under check. Theft from vehicles, same again, not significant. It's again, I have to kind of repeat myself because a lot of these individuals are incarcerated right now. So typically what happens when we get individuals, we'll identify and we'll put a project together, we'll get them before the courts, and then they're gone for a bit of time. But once they come back, that spike will come up again. So we have to start over. Theft and shoplifting, slightly up over the last couple of years. Went down in 2020, but it went up by a couple of files. And that is, part of that is the reporting from the stores and shops that they actually reporting those matters to us. But part of it is getting the community on board and making sure when something happens, when there's a file, that we're aware of it. Drugs, not too much in the outlying regions. A lot of that is kind of localized in the, Courtney and Comox and those areas there. So not a lot of files for those kind of investigations, but it's still enough to get our attention. So that's kind of a quick snapshot of what our file count is for the community. Again, last year's priorities, I kind of sent an email asking that you keep those priorities because they're significant and they really work. They work for us, they work for the community, and there's something we can target, and something we can get some data on. And I think they'll be helpful to keep those in place, but that's your choice. If you have something else you want to add to that, then you can have a discussion on that and we can add it, certainly. Likewise, if you find something you don't need anymore, then by all means, take it off there and have a discussion on that. And then we can work towards getting those priorities in place so we can kind of manage that at the community level. So that's quick. I know it is. Any questions? We can open it up.
Great, thanks. I'll open it up to questions, and we have Director Arbor.
Yeah, and it is. Oh, wow, we're loud today. Loud and clear. Yeah. Thanks for coming over. It's nice to see you in person rather than Zoom, for sure. It's been a couple of years. Yeah, and I'm not surprised to see the number of vehicle thefts in Fanny Bay based on the Facebook chatter. That's a big jump from like 2 to 26 in a year. And as you say, it's probably associated with certain individuals. Doesn't take much to move the dial, I'm sure. Since I saw you, I think last year we added to the priority obviously the toxic drug supply kind of efforts, and at the time you mentioned the Comox Valley itself is a bit of an outlier in terms of we're not the big hub regionally for that, but we still see a lot of it and suffer the consequences. And I joined the board of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and I actually joined the Community Safety Committee. And we were on a call a couple of months ago around precisely that, the toxic supply. And we had the head of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police come and talk to us. And they had taken the position that they were coming out in favor of decriminalization as well. So there's a huge effort with BC, and I don't know if that would translate to improvements in the valley, both in the municipalities. From your perspective, I'd love to hear a little bit of on the ground from your perspective on that. We know the number of that, and that's the only stat that I wish you had. Like, I don't know if we collect regionally the number of deaths in the region that we've had from fentanyl and otherwise. Not sure if anybody collects that really, or maybe, yeah. So yeah, so we know it's gotten worse in the last year, anyways, Canada-wide. But yeah, those were interesting calls. So overall, I think it, in terms of priorities, I would definitely keep that one on there. And it looks like Black Creek could almost use a little side office or something. Like there's a lot of activity there still from your stats. So, but I don't know if you don't have comments, that's okay. But it was an interesting call because BC has submitted formally to the federal government, and any local feedback, I'd be happy because then I can take it with me too when I have discussions.
Yeah, so certainly you're talking about the coroner will have the statistics for fatal overdoses. They're the keeper of those. Of course, we keep our own, but the coroners will be the ones that have it specifically to overdose related deaths, and they're publishing those routinely now just because of the concerns. When it comes talking about criminalization, decriminalization of drugs, you have to understand that typically the targeting is not targeting the day-to-day users, right? We're targeting the suppliers, the dealers, those sorts of things. So a lot of discretion is already being utilized by our members on the front line, and we're very aware of what's going on there. So that's where the targeting lies in, is not that day-to-day user suffering some substance use issues, but the dealers anyway.
Oh, just a second.
Got me there. We take our direction from Division and Ottawa. So if there's any direction coming on that kind of movement, then we'll be notified and then we'll respond or adjust accordingly. Unfortunately, COVID has kind of taken a front seat to the overdose issue. There is still individuals passing on from drug use, but that's not really being published right now for various reasons. We've had a few in the community and not to the point where it was a few years ago, but that's something, like you said, the coroner has records for. We get reports from our drug unit, not our drug analysis unit, which is, I think it's Ottawa, but just some of the seizures we have, what type of drug it is. So we get updated that way. So fentanyl's at the top and there's carfentanil, cocaine still up there, and heroin. Those are kind of the four main ones that are very popular and still in use. We don't really get any stats on the marijuana usage at all.
Director Green?
Thanks, Madam Chair, and through the chair and the CAO. I'd like to thank you guys for coming out. It's interesting that Black Creek is on the radar there, but I imagine being that Black Creek is so far out, and if you go as far as Macaulay Road, you got another, potential 20 minutes out to the end of that. So I've heard people say that it is difficult to respond out there because of the distance. You're sort of equidistant between the Campbell River and Courtney, aren't you? So just your thoughts on that. Do you actually have, cruising patrols in that area during highway patrol and whatnot as well? Or do you have to respond right from the detachment and drive all the way out?
It's twofold. Members should be patrolling everywhere. That's their responsibility. If it's a calls for service, yeah, it depends where they are on what their timelines are responding. So files are put through our dispatch center and then they're prioritized. So they go priority 1, 2, 3, and 4. 3s and 4s aren't going to get any attention right away because they're like a theft from vehicle where there's no imminent danger, there's no issues for safety. 1s and 2s are typically the assaults and domestics where you're going to get immediate response. And depending on where you're on the list, then you're getting a response to that. If there's no imminent danger, then there's going to be a little bit of time delay getting to those. But we all that's why reporting is important. When people see something or have an issue, they need to call it and then it can be prioritized. It might not get action, but it does become data. And then if we see a trend or pattern with if we have a full-time analyst that identifies those areas, then we can target those areas. Because I know Schultz Road is a bit of a nuisance area, and all the communities work towards nuisance properties and they're updating their bylaws. Macaulay Road, yes, that's a long ways out, but hopefully we can get there in a timely manner. I don't want members driving crazy to get to a call where there's no danger to anybody involved, right? Yeah. So we want to come, we got to work with traffic rules and we want to get there in a timely fashion and safely. So they should be patrolling and they typically do, but it all depends on where they are when they're responding. So we don't, who's ever free is going to take the call. There any number of time when we have a file we have to investigate, there is going to be downtime for that member. So that member is basically taken off the road or out of service for a bit of time while they do their file. So when a file is generated, we want them to do it, complete it to a point where they can put it aside, like all investigative tasks have to be completed on that file, and then they'll move on to the next one. So sometimes there is going to be a time delay depending on what factors involved with that call. And then they'll move on to the next file, and then that'll queue, and then they'll respond to that.
Well, there is a significant amount of people in that area, of course. It's a fairly dense area. Mm-hmm. In my jurisdiction of Area C anyway. But it does seem odd because there's no pubs in the area anymore. Of course, it used to be the Fisherman's was rocking every Saturday and Friday night. And there was even the Hideaway up Macaulay Road. And of course, Salmon Point as well burned to the ground. So it just seems odd there'd be a spike like this in activity that isn't correlated to alcohol consumption, because it seems to be a factor in just about everything. So yeah, what was the other thing I was going to ask you too? It's escaped me. It couldn't have been that important, I guess. I'll let one of the other directors. Thank you.
Sure, I'll let the response because I see a light on.
Sometimes we're dealing with smaller numbers like that, because you're only, all it takes is one or two people in a certain subculture to really drive up stats, right? And of course, we typically have an idea of who those people are. We're fortunate enough to be, it's a small enough community, small enough area. Still, we're not too big where people can remain anonymous. That just takes a little bit of time before we can do our thing and take them on a commission, so to speak. But yeah, sometimes those smaller areas with the smaller calls for service, like I said, it just takes a few things in order to drive. It looks like it drives the stats up when it's really just one or two offenders.
Go ahead, Inspector Curtis.
So part of the issue is we're evidence-based, so we need to collect evidence to forward charges. Sometimes that takes time. So some people think that we're lacking in productivity or however you want to put it, but we have to collect other evidence and we have to present that to the courts, and then they have final charge approval. So we could be putting paper in all the time, and if it doesn't meet the charge approval level, then it's not going to get forwarded. So there is a process to that.
If I may ask a question before you direct to Grieve. Inspector Curvers, you mentioned, and you know, that there are certain individuals that may be the repeat offenders in areas like Black Creek and Royston. I'm wondering if there is any benefit in supporting or encouraging neighborhood watch programs, or can that help at all with those kind of repeat offender situations?
Yeah, that's something we can talk about. I know that takes volunteers.
Yeah.
And that's volunteer driven. And right now, I think after about 2 years, 3 years, we just got Speed Watch back. So they just, yeah. So go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm just going to add that community, or that sort of community watch has sort of come to the forefront again, and it's a supported program through E-Division. So I know there is one in Courtney, and yeah, it's always benefit to have more eyes out there, right?
Absolutely. Does that take quite a lot of resources from the RCMP to sort of set up, or is that still?
Well, it should be community driven.
Yeah.
Right. And so there would be a coordinator, a liaison, but that sort of thing should be a sort of grassroots and community driven project.
Great. Okay. Director Green?
Yeah, that kind of reminded me, because at one point there was a lot of action on the foreshore in Saratoga Miracle Beach area. And we actually funded the local residents association, and they got some security patrols just to drive around. And they eventually didn't have to do it anymore, because I guess the individuals that were causing most of the issues kind of outgrew it, moved off to Alberta and got jobs and whatever, and we didn't need it anymore. But interesting, I know that one time, Mike, you said that you know, with a lot of this petty crime, that you can hold people for 48 hours. Then you pretty well have to let them go, unless the Crown decides to press charges. And right now, of course, with COVID and everything else, the Crown doesn't seem to be too anxious to get involved in all the small stuff, or so to speak. But do you see a change now that we're coming out of this pandemic? Is the Crown getting a little more concerned about, because you know the whole theory about zero tolerance, right? You know, once you break a window, then the other window gets broken, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just curious if you have, I don't want to put you on the spot. Did you see but do you see the Crown maybe firming up its resolve to maybe go forward with some of the stuff that isn't, you know, major crime?
I'm not going to speak for Crown and
Yeah.
the process. For us, we will respond to all calls for service and do what is appropriate and submit the appropriate paperwork. And then it lies with Crown on what their decision is, whether charge approval is approved or not.
A lot of people aren't aware of that. They think it's like the US where the police can lay charges. So we do
Yeah.
have that extra layer.
But that happens in the prairies where members or police can lay charge, but BC is very unique where it is with Crown to decide whether there's a charge approval or not.
So you should have got a law degree, in other words. Sorry about that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just, before you go, just wanted to pass on thanks from, I know our bylaw staff, when they do report to us, have said the great relations that they've had between them and RCMP when they're having to deal with difficult files. So just want to pass on our appreciation for your support for that.
Yes, thank you. We have put some mechanism in place for that kind of response. Especially with the islands, we are a bike unit. They might be mandated with some of the homeless scenarios in the community, no matter where it is, getting out in the communities, doing the bike patrols, talking to our stakeholders and partners, getting out there, and they're responsible for Denman and Hornby as well. So they go out there routinely when there's issues or concerns on the islands. We get them, or if it's an immediate response, we'll send someone over on the ferry. But that's what we try and do, and trying to, make sure we have all those mechanisms in place for proper response to calls.
Great. That's burned on a question from Director Arbor or comment.
I just realized this is our last meeting of our term anyways, then we're heading to election. So I probably won't see you again unless we get back in. But my last question is we all have a passion at the CVRD for climate action. So I was just in Victoria and they're getting their first all electric cop car. Is the RCMP starting to come up with policies for electrification? Is that something we're going to see in the Valley in the near future?
That's something I haven't heard of, but I know bigger detachment have hybrid cars. So I don't know if we're in that process yet or where we are with that from our detachment anyways.
Great. Thank you.
Well, the bike guys are looking for e-bikes, so.
Oh, that's good. All right. I don't see any other comments or questions. So on receipt, all in favor? Opposed, and that's carried unanimously. Thank you, both of you.
One last comment about the priorities. If you decide to change it or alter it or anything, just let me know. And then we'll get that signed off in place.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is our management report for receipt. Moved and seconded. And are there any items that directors want to speak to? Seeing none, all in favor of receipt? Opposed, and that's carried. We have advisory planning commission minutes for areas B and C. Moved and seconded. Comments on those? Seeing none, all in favor? And that is carried. All right, our first development variance permit for 909 Jutland Terrace for receipt. Moved and seconded, and I'll pass it to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors, and Brian Chow, Planner, is here to introduce the report and answer any of your questions.
Welcome, Brian.
Thank you. So through the CEO to the chair and committee members, we have a development variance permit application for the property at 909 Jutland Terrace on Mount Washington. This property is 0.02 hectares in area, and the applicant is proposing to rebuild a previously existing single detached dwelling that was damaged by fire in 2020. The applicant wishes to build a new single detached dwelling at its original location and requests to increase the maximum building height of the proposed dwelling from 10 meters to 13.7 meters, which is shown in the staff report, figures 3 to 7. Please note that this measurement includes a proposed box-in chimney in order to handle the weight of the snow. Without this chimney enclosure, the height of the proposed dwelling is 12.9 meters. This request requires the issuance of a development variance permit. The property is zoned Mount Washington Comprehensive Development Zone in the sub-district of Resort Accommodation 1. In this sub-district zone, there is a maximum building height limit of 10 meters for principal buildings. And just a reminder for the committee members, building height in the zoning bylaw is defined as the vertical distance from the natural grade level of the building footprint to the highest part of the roof surface. As briefly mentioned earlier, the proposed 13.7 meters building height request includes a proposed box-in chimney of 0.08 meters in height. Without this feature, the height of the house itself is 12.9 meters. Normally, the committee members would not factor in the chimney factor because there's a section in the zoning bylaw that exempts chimney from the maximum height restrictions. However, because of the box-in request, we have to factor the enclosure as part of this variance request. In support of their variance application, the applicant submitted their rationale for this request, and they're attached in Appendix B for your reference. Some of the rationale includes there's a big height difference of the ground. The entrance of the previously burnt damaged building, so the entrance of the building is from the higher side of the property, and from past experience of their burnt down building, the snow will be so much that they could not get in because of the snow. And that the previous dwelling was 12.2 meters in height. So neighbors should be accustomed to a building of such excess height. Reasons in the zoning bylaw to regulate maximum building heights include to preserve views of the neighbors, protect privacy of the neighbors, minimize shadows, and maintain overall scale and character. Planning staff reviewed this application and is in support of this proposal because the location of the property being at the southwestern edge of the strata is at the lowest part of the neighborhood, and the local factors would dampen the impacts of views, privacy, and shadows and noise, and would unlikely alter the alpine cabin character of farming character. The Advisory Planning Commission met on March 10th, 2020, and voted unanimously to support the variance. Their rationale is that the proposal is not offensive to the farming character. The applicant's proposal and reasons demonstrate thought into a design that's compatible with the surroundings and helps to protect existing trees. As this is a development variance permit application, we mail letters within 50 meters radius of the property. And as of today, I've received 2 correspondence, one at 914 Jutland Terrace, which is approximately 15 meters away, and that was in support of this variance. The second one located at 886 Jutland, which is approximately 32 meters away from the east. And in this second one, the owner was not in support of the variance. The applicant is on attendance to answer any questions you may have. And that's all I have for now, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you. I'd like to ask the applicant if they'd like to add anything to the presentation.
Yes, I would. Thank you for listening to me. I just wanted to indicate that it's not so much about numbers in some ways, in that the surveyor had to come after the house that had burnt down was removed, and they excavated all the way down to the rocks. And so because it's just a 50-foot circle, the lots in that area, they could only take the average grade within the excavated portion, which is 14 feet lower than the roadway. So I have some images to illustrate the site conditions. I'm not too sure if you can move that up a little bit so you can see the bottom. Thank you, Lisa. So as you can see, my average grade is mostly taken to the bottom of this edge. And the lot or the building behind me I did a survey of the closest two houses to my property, and that building in this particular photograph is 16.5 meters in height. And then if you can go to slide 2, please, Lisa. And then the applicant or the person who sent in the letter saying that they weren't for it. I'm not too sure if they understood where average grade was taken, but I had last summer their house also surveyed, and it was at 12.5 meters. So, and it's above me and I'm lower and in a hole. So I just want that to be considered. And then maybe page 3, please, Lisa. So just showing, this is a view from when my house was still not burnt. And you can see that most of the surrounding chalets from my view are all very tall because of the topography. I know there was a time when there was no height restrictions. And so perhaps most of them in my area were developed during that time. And then page 4 is just showing an image of my cabin that's buried. And that's the road in front. So you can't even get in. We had there's it's really, really short. It looks like abnormally short compared to all of the other cabins. And this cabin, the existing cabin, was just only, I think, 3 meter or 0.3 meters shorter than what I'm proposing. Maybe Brian, you can correct me on that. Yeah, the original one was 12.2 in this picture, but it was also sunken into the ground with the over excavation. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for adding that. We have a question from Director Grieve.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and through CAO. Thank you very much for making that little presentation. I will say that my APC was quite familiar with the unique alpine environment that these buildings are located in, and whereas maybe under different circumstances they might have taken issue with the height, but because of the extenuating circumstances around, as you can see, the snowfall and everything else, that it was unanimous. In the end, they all agreed with that they would put forward the variance. So, thanks so much.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to quote unquote excuse you from the table.
Thank you.
I believe we have some correspond. Oh, we should vote on receipt first, and then. Okay. Oh, so on receipt first. All in favor of receipt? Opposed? That's carried. The correspondence has been moved and seconded. Any comments on those? Seeing none. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. And any other items on the addendum? Okay. So we have a recommendation then. Moved and seconded that the development variance permit be approved. Any comments? Yeah, I have none. It sounds like the finished building is not going to be standing out, because of the grade and because of the height of the other buildings. So I have no objections there. So all in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you so much. Item number 3, development variance permit for 2041 Quenville Road for receipt. Moved and seconded. And over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors, and Dylan Thiessen, Planner, is here to present this report and answer any of your questions.
Great, thanks. Welcome, Dylan.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Through the chair to the directors, staff have received a development variance permit application to increase the accessory floor area of the ground floor of a carriage house from 90 square meters to approximately 132 square meters. The subject property, located at 2041 Quenville Road, is 1.4 hectares in size. It is zoned residential 1 and is designated as being within a settlement expansion area. The density provisions for the R1 zone, or residential 1, allow for a single detached dwelling not limited in size, and either a secondary suite, secondary dwelling, or carriage house Each secondary option would be limited to 90 square meters of residential floor area. And in the case of the carriage house, this floor area limit extends to the accessory ground floor as well. The owner is seeking to construct residential space above an existing accessory structure. And once a residential suite is placed above, the floor area of the existing building is approximately 132 square meters, which is why the variance is required. The structure was built without a building permit by a previous owner, and the current owner will be going through all permitting requirements to legalize the structure. The Advisory Planning Commission for Area B voted to support the variance as there is a negligible increase in the building footprint and it utilizes an existing structure as opposed to requiring a need for a brand new structure. Staff are recommending that the variance be approved, as the main intent of limiting the floor area of each floor of a carriage house is primarily to limit the overall scope and size of development to ensure it remains consistent with a rural farming character. The applicant worked with staff to redesign the proposed development, and in so doing made it significantly smaller, meaning the footprint of the building is only minimally increasing and the combined floor area of the two floors is close to 180 square meters, which helps the applicant work towards the intent of the floor area limitation. Staff sent notification letters to property owners within a 100-meter radius of the subject property and received no correspondence regarding the variance. The owner, Francois, I believe, is on the Zoom call as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Dylan. Francois, would you like to add anything to the presentation?
Thank you. If I may, just doing conversion measurements this morning, I believe that we are well within the 180 square meters. The addition would be 46. And as presented to you this morning, the existing footprint of the building is 128.6 square meters. So that giving me a total of, give or take 3 meters, but about 177 square meters. So within the bylaw. As Mr. Thiessen mentioned, we did work on this in a collaborative manner and made some adjustments to be within the bylaw, although the split is not a 90 plus 90, but I believe this is being reasonable. Yeah, that's it. Thank you for your time.
Great, thank you. Do directors have any questions? No, I'd just like to thank you for working in collaboration with our staff. It sounds like you've come up with a good compromise here. So on receipt then, all in favor? Opposed? And that's carried, and I'll excuse the applicant from the table. And I don't believe we have any correspondence. Is there anyone in the room or on Zoom that would like to speak to this file? Hearing and seeing none, then we have a recommendation. Moved, and I can second. Comments on the recommendation to approve the DVP? Seeing none, all in favor then? Opposed? And that's carried. Great. Thank you so much. And moving on, the DVP for 6056 Island Highway North for receipt. Moved and seconded, and back to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. And we have a development variance permit as well as a development permit for this application. Dylan Thiessen will outline the report and answer any of your questions.
Great, thanks.
Thank you very much. Through the chair to the directors, staff have received a development variance permit and a form and character development permit application for the construction of a new building on a commercially zoned property. The subject property, located at 6056 Island Highway North, is approximately 1.12 hectares in size, is zoned commercial 1, and is designated as being within a rural settlement area. Beginning with the variance application, the proposed building is at the rear of the property, which requires a 4.5 meter rear lot line setback. The applicant is proposing to construct the building at an angle to the lot line, with the closest point being 3.35 meters from the lot line. So a variance of 1.15 meters is being requested. The Advisory Planning Commission for Area B considered the application and voted to not support the variance when the proposed variance was for a setback of 1.75 meters. The applicant changed the building design in response to this feedback and resulted with a 3.35 meter setback after that meeting. Staff sent nearby property owners and tenants mail notification of the variance request and received one response from a neighbor in support of the variance application. Staff are recommending that the variance be approved as the 3.35 meter setback leaves enough space for the structure to be maintained without decreasing privacy or negatively altering the form and character of the property based on what would otherwise be allowed. With respect to the form and character development permit, the applicant is proposing to construct a 6.7 meter two-story building in forest green metal with a black pitched tin-clad roof. The applicant has submitted an engineer-prepared rainwater management plan to ensure that any additional runoff created by the development will be contained and will not drain into roadways or neighboring properties. He's also submitted a landscaping plan featuring natural and hard landscaping to screen and buffer the development from neighboring properties and roadways. In terms of what's already there, the siting of the structure allows for 4 mature trees to remain as well. The applicant is proposing a 2.5 meter fence, concrete blocks placed along the rear of the new building to prevent the area from being used in association with the commercial use, and ground cover vegetation along the Lever Road fence to ensure that no outdoor storage occurs too close to a lot line. The APC for Area B voted to support the development permit as it was proposed, and staff recommend that the DP be approved as it meets all technical requirements as outlined within the official community plan. The property owner, David, is also joining us on Zoom.
Great, thank you. David, welcome. Would you like to add anything to the presentation?
Everything's basically covered there. I just I'm concerned with the property here. It's like, I mean, I got limited space, but also some very mature, beautiful trees, and I just wanted to save them. So, you know, just working just to try to build a building in a way that could be good for my business, but also, you know, taking account of those factors.
Great, thank you. Do directors have any questions of the applicant? No, and I appreciate you wanting to save those the fruit trees. So thank you for that. I'll quote unquote excuse you from the table then. On receipt then, all in favor? Opposed? It's carried. We have correspondence to receive. Moved and seconded. Any comments? Yeah, and that was in favor. So all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And we have a couple of recommendations. So recommendation 1 has been moved, and that is to approve the development variance permit. Comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Recommendation 2 is to approve the commercial form and character development permit. Comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thanks very much. Item number 5, Electoral Area C, 3745 Piercy Road, rezoning application for receipt. Moved and seconded, and over to staff.
Thank you very much. And Dylan Deason will provide an outline of this report and answer any of your questions.
Back to you, Dylan.
Thank you very much. Through the chair to the directors, a rezoning application has been received by staff to enable a 2-lot subdivision under Section 514 of the Local Government Act, or the LGA. Section 514 of the LGA allows for the subdivision of land, specifically to provide residence to a relative when a property may not otherwise qualify for subdivision based on a local government's land use bylaws. In this case, the property is 3.6 hectares in size, and the property's zone, Rural 8, requires each post-subdivision lot to be at least 8 hectares in size, which is why the subdivision is being pursued through Section 514. Proposed Lot 1 would be 1.6 hectares in size, and proposed Lot 2 would be 2 hectares in size. The property is serviced by a private well and septic system, and the rear property would have access from Hogan Road. If this rezoning application is ultimately approved, a condition of approval will be a limitation of 1 dwelling unit per newly created lot so that the overall density does not increase due to the subdivision. At this point of the process, though, staff are seeking the endorsement of the board to undertake First Nations and external agency referrals. Staff are recommending that the agency referral list attached to the staff report be endorsed, as this will allow staff to seek feedback from the indicated First Nations and external agencies, and will in turn provide more context and information on the proposed application.
Do directors have any questions? Director Grieve?
Yeah, so this is the old 946, right? It's now the
514.
for what? 514. See? That's why you don't want to be a planner, folks. Got to relearn everything. Okay, so this is actually provincial jurisdiction, isn't it? In some ways, they get to make, is it they get to make the call, don't they?
Right. So there are still local government bylaws that come into effect. The regional district there is a section in the zoning bylaw that requires a rezoning application in order to enable use of section 514, which is permitted. So these are provincial regulations that allow this to take place, but there are still some allowances for the local government to further regulate and comment on that. So the need to rezone basically respects the property's zone in terms of subdivision lot size and allows staff to take an individual case-by-case approach to these.
Right.
Ton wants to chime in.
Oh, sorry, I missed that. Thank you. Yeah, Ton.
Through the CEO to Madam Chair and to Director Grieve, if the board did approve this rezoning application, the applicant would have to apply to Ministry of Transportation for the subdivision, and it's the Ministry of Transportation who is the approving officer for subdivision, as you're part aware. So that's their second process if the board approves this rezoning.
Go ahead, Director.
Yeah, thanks very much. I would just like to add, though, that I know that these have come up in the past, and I think quite wisely have restricted it to one dwelling. So there's really no net increase in the amount of dwellings that are allowed on the property. But I'm in favor of these kind of applications, because anybody who has kids knows darn well that it's darn near impossible to get a start in the housing market nowadays. So I think it's important that we cut these families a little slack so that they can actually have family members. And it also helps in the aging in place process, because I know myself, just if I have family around me, I'm going to be staying in my house a lot longer. And it seems to me that people stay in their house a lot longer, live into their 90s. So I'm hoping that's me. Thanks.
Just a question to staff. The limit to the one house, does that stay in perpetuity even if the property is sold? Okay, I'm seeing nods there. Thank you. All right, I don't see any other questions then. On receipt, all in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. And we have a recommendation moved and seconded that the CVRD endorse the agency referral list as outlined and consult with First Nations in accordance with the referrals. Any comments on that? Hearing and seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Item number 6, Area C, ALR non-farm use for replacement of fill. Moved and seconded, and over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. And as my wife is the Chair of the Agricultural Land Commission, I remove myself from consideration of these applications, and Jake Martins will sit in as the acting CAO.
Careful, like.
Great, thanks. Yeah, over to Jake.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Jody McLean is here to present this report. However, before Jody introduces this report, I will just take this opportunity to seek the director's feedback in regards to your access to the agendas. I know there is a technical difficulty preventing your access, so we have determined that a reset of our modem should hopefully address the issue. It takes about 10 minutes, so just look for an opportunity when you feel suitable to conduct that.
Okay, that seems okay. Yeah.
Over to you, Jody.
All right, welcome, Jody.
All right, thanks a lot. So in this file is the result of an Alr Compliance File. Over the span of several years, the owner has placed fill on the lot in contravention to the Alr regulations. Through the submission of this application, the owner has provided a report prepared by a professional agrologist and requests that the commissioners of the Agricultural Land Commission review the situation in hopes of not requiring any further remediation. The ALC requires that these applications be reviewed by the local officials first before they give consideration to it. So the options here for the board are to forward the application to the Agricultural Land Commission for consideration by the commissioners under their mandate, or to refuse the application. If forwarded, the CVRD may provide comments and recommendations to the commissioners. If the application is refused, this turns back to the ALC Compliance Department. The file was reviewed by the Agricultural Advisory Planning Commission and the regional agrologist. All parties, including the applicant's professional agrologist, all recognize the deterioration of the agricultural potential of this land. The regional agrologist concluded that the retaining the fill on the land serves no benefit to agriculture. The consulting professional agrologist notes that reclamation would be costly and long-term endeavor involving further qualified professionals. However, the Agricultural Advisory Planning Commission did recommend the application be forwarded to the Agricultural Land Commission with the recommendation that reclamation be limited to leveling off the affected areas. Madam Chair, due to the extent of the fill, the staff here is recommending that the file be forwarded to the Land Commission so that they may review what, if anything, may be acceptable and providing further guidance to their compliance officers and to work with the applicant to find a practical solution in the best interest of agriculture in the Comox Valley. Representing the owner online here is Logan Lapointe, the agent.
Great, thank you. Do directors have any questions? Oh, sorry. And Logan, do you have a comment to make, or do you want to add to that presentation?
My only comment would be, and thank you for inviting me to this meeting. My only comment would be that I think, Jody, you said that the owner had deposited fill. I would just say that the current owner is the widow of the previous owner that did all the fill. So the current owner wasn't really involved at all in the deposition of the fill. The only other comment I would make is that, and I believe the Ag APC committee also noted this. While it's true that the construction fill isn't particularly useful for agricultural purposes, the fill was deposited into what was an empty quarry after gravel had been mined out of there by the previous owner. And what the committee had noted was that the previous state of the land wasn't particularly good for agriculture either. So it's not necessarily any worse off now than it was. It just so happens that it was gravel, and now it's pretty decent actually construction fill. But those are my only comments.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
We have a question from Director Arbor. Oh, I think I will switch Director Arbor's net first.
Can staff confirm that that history?
Yes, that's correct. There was a gravel mine there for several years validly. They had the correct approvals and all that. And then the fill came in afterwards in excess of what was previously approved.
Dr. Bree?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll be very tactful, but the deceased previous owner was well known to the staff at the regional district. There was some contention with the province over culverts and flooding, and I think that field was hayed by, I think the Taylors used to go and hay it, but it would be underwater most of the time. And I'm quite sure that the widow herself had no idea really what was going on or the implications of what was going on. So I do hope that the commission, because it's going to cost quite a bit to level off those piles, but I mean, it's probably what's going to be required to have any kind of farm activity at all, even greenhouses or what have you, or maybe poultry operation or whatever. But yeah, I mean, it's a unique situation, and I think that obviously the widow herself deserves a little bit of leeway on this. whether it needs to happen, tomorrow or when they sell the property in 5 years' time or whatever. But just a little background. Yeah, so there's a lot of history here. Thank you.
Thanks. Director Arbor.
Yeah, and this would almost be a question to the chair, because I know you've got some experience with this, but it looks like the kind of project that would be a multi-year project if you wanted to restore the potential. And what it makes me think about is whether the region is organized to. It's not the first time we see Phil like that, but to assist land kind of restore to an agricultural state. We have Skyrocket, we're going to get organics. Like, I don't know if on a multi-year plan, the regional district can actually support efforts to restore agricultural lands. Because otherwise, what's the other solution? Just to let it sit. But any thoughts on that? If there's opportunities around that in the valley, and whether if we forward it to the ALC, whether they get creative as well around those things, or whether they're just going to basically penalize and walk away.
So actually, I'll punt that over to staff, because my understanding is that we generally don't provide support like that to private individuals and farms. I mean, obviously, we have product available through both Skyrocket and through the upcoming organics facility. My question to staff was actually a little bit of background on gravel mining in the ALR. So correct me if I'm wrong, when mining happens, is the owner of the land not supposed to refill that and return it back to grade? Or what was the process that was missed here in filling in the gravel pit when it was done? Sorry.
Oh, so yeah. Okay, the gravel pit was mostly on that southern portion there. And yeah, there is a gravel pit. I'm not sure the exact ownership. I think it was Ministry of Transportation had a gravel pit there. And I'm not sure. Yeah, there's reclamation plans that go into place in conjunction with not just the Agricultural Land Commission, but also the Ministry of Energy and Mines. When they regulate those, they put in what has to happen at the end. And I'm not sure the history of what happened at the end of that. This application, maybe Logan has more insight into that, but the extent of this application is mostly just what happened afterwards.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it hasn't quite been returned back to agricultural capability, but the placement of the fill at Logan, I don't know if you've got any insight into that. I would have thought it would have been part of the reclamation.
So the reclamation portion of the initial permit had been fairly vague. It was supposed to be backfilled. I don't know if it was so specific as to say backfilled to initial grade or what have you, but it does seem that it's been somewhat overfilled. But more recently, in the conversations I've had with the Ministry of Mines, all that they have told us, because the mining permit is still open and we've been trying to close it for years, and they say, well, you can't close it until the reclamation is complete. And we said, well, okay, what is the reclamation you want? And they say whatever is satisfactory to the Agricultural Land Commission. Mm-hmm. So it becomes somewhat circular.
Okay. All right. So then it does make sense to forward this over to the Land Commission. My only, the concern that kind of sits in the back of my head is that, yes, it's going to take a lot of money to reclaim that back into agriculture. Yeah. And I would hate to see an application to remove this land from the ALR because of this process. So that's not something I would support. But I think overall, the decision is going to come from the Land Commission anyways. It doesn't look like we as local government have any power to compel, the owner to do anything here. So I think it does make sense to move this application forward. Okay, those are my comments. So I don't see any other hands up on receipt then. All in favor? Opposed? The recommendation is to forward to the Agricultural Land Commission this application concerning placement of fill. Any more comments? Hearing and seeing none. All in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Would folks like to keep going, or do you want to take a break? Onwards we go then. Bearland Strata water metering update for receipt. Moved and seconded, and over to staff.
Thank you very much. And I believe online we have Keely Lambert, our engineer. Oh, he's here. Sorry. There he stuck in. Thanks, Keely. And Chris is online to support him. Thanks.
All right, thanks. Over to staff. On the button, and I will turn you on.
Thank you for allowing me to introduce my staff report. So there are several Bearland stratas within the CVRD's electoral areas, which are serviced by the Comox Valley Water System. These properties have their own water distribution infrastructure that strata members pay for and maintain. CVRD currently has water meters to each strata property line and bill each strata the multifamily rate, but each strata council is responsible for apportioning the water bill among each of the strata members. In support of the CVRD's water conservation efforts, a previous EASC motion was passed in 2011 to require new Bearland stratas to install water meters as part of the development permit condition, which would require modification of the official community plan. If this new development permit was created, the use of water meters would solely be at the discretion of the strata council. Staff ran a recent GIS analysis of Bearland stratas and found that only 2 stratas with a total of 10 lots have been created in the electoral areas since 2013. Staff acknowledged this issue has remained open for a significant period of time, but given the jurisdictional areas, the issues, staff now feel that this proposed development permit would be a minimal benefit towards CVRD's water conservation efforts and recommend that this motion be rescinded.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the directors? Wow, seeing none. Okay, well, I'm glad that we're also removing something from the management report, dating back quite a bit. On receipt then, all in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. And we have a recommendation to rescind. Moved and seconded. Any other comments? Hearing and seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thanks. 3550 Cumberland Road Water Service Connection for receipt. Moved, and I can second. Over to staff.
Thank you very much. And Kaylee will present this report and answer any of your questions as well.
Great, thanks. Back to you.
Thank you. Several months ago, the landowner of 3550 Cumberland Road, which is technically within the village of Cumberland's jurisdiction, approached us about the possibility of connecting to our water main that runs adjacent to his property. The property owner has had multiple wells dug on his property and they show similar levels of contamination. Despite the efforts to filter the groundwater using reverse osmosis and iron filter systems, they are admittedly still overwhelmed by the contamination. Because of the jurisdictional issues, staff have reached out to legal counsel who identified the most efficient way to legally supply water to this property is for the CVRD to enter into an agreement with Cumberland to provide water to the property. We have reached out to staff at the village of Cumberland and they are willing to look into this further and are looking at the legislative constraints on their end. While this is an onerous administrative process for servicing one property, staff believe this is the neighborly thing to do. We have provided a rough estimate of $5,000 for connecting the property to the property owner, and they are happy with that cost. Staff are looking for comments in support of this concept from the ESC prior to drafting an agreement with the village of Cumberland.
Comments from the directors? Director Arbor?
Thanks. It's going to be great to see Cumberland join the water committee and eventually transfer over, shut down the lakes that are being logged around and join the Comox Lake system so we can focus all of our conservation efforts around Comox Lake rather than subsidiary lake. I think this was discussed, right, a number of years ago for Cumberland to kind of turn off the taps and join the water system. I'm joking, but this is one home. and I find it pretty funny that we'll have the one home in Cumberland on our system. Obviously, a service agreement does not bring governance consideration. Are there other homes though that would be in a similar position, neighbors or otherwise?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments?
And I'm not in Texas.
Okay. All in favor of receipt then? Opposed? And that's carried. And then we have a recommendation to support in principle an extension of the water service. Moved and seconded. Any other comments? Hearing and seeing none. All in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. We have some items of new business. We have a letter from Area B regarding a water feasibility, water supply feasibility study for receipt. Moved and seconded. Okay, and I can speak to that. I was approached by residents of this area to look at contemplating extending a water service to them and the neighborhoods. And they've done a bit of canvassing in the community and have seen a fairly good support. So are asking for a more formal study, feasibility study from our staff so that better costs can be recommended. There is some budget available in Area B feasibility study. So that's where it would be coming from. Questions from Director Arbor?
Yeah, sounds like a really good initiative. You know, I think alternative to, as per our RJS, to have the municipalities take us over, it seems like those service agreements are the current way to go. We still haven't learned a ton over the last 4 years why municipalities are not interested in fully taking on, but that they are open to service agreements. But you know, I guess the feasibility will identify the interests of everyone and the sense in that. But for the residents, it seems to be a really good idea to at least explore.
Madam Chair, just to clarify that we have not had discussions with the town on a formal basis as to whether they would be interested or not. That may, their consideration as to whether this should be incorporated or not might come out of the feasibility study or further analysis. This is really a reaction to residents coming forward to ask us to look into the matter.
I will note that a number of residents actually asked that they not be annexed into Comox Town. That, you know, they really wanted to support this if they didn't have to become part of Comox. So that's a lot of opinions there. Director Grieve, a question? Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I had a similar thing quite a few years back on the England road system where, you know, obviously the political climate was quite different. And all us rural guys were trying to freeload on the city's infrastructure. But that has since turned the corner, thank heavens. My question is, how many properties are we talking? And does this water have to flow through a city system to get to us? Or do we have our own distribution?
Chris LaRose is aware of the proposal, is on the line. I'll just ask him to give consideration to your questions, Director Grieve.
Sure. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Through the chair. So yes, the water would necessarily come from town of Comox distribution system. So the closest regional water line that we have would be the feed to the Comox Valley Water Pollution Control Center, but then that comes off of a town water main. So we did informally reach out to the town at the beginning of this process just to confirm whether technical staff there supported the concept, and they did support in principle. But as Russell mentioned, one of the next steps would be to kind of formalize that support. But yeah, there would be some collaboration with the town required to piggyback on their infrastructure or potentially reconsider the feed line that goes all the way out to the treatment plant, potentially becoming a regional line rather than staying as part of the town distribution network.
And Chris, correct me, I think about 100 homes, is that what we were looking at?
Yeah, give or take. That's right. Just one of the pieces that we've been kind of working with that neighborhood on is kind of how to pick a boundary for the water service area. For example, there was some desire on the part of the community to consider provision of water to kind of some lower density homes on the extremities of that service area. So we flagged that is likely to increase the average cost per connection. So yeah, so that's another piece that we would be working with the community to support them on finding the right boundaries. But it is around 100 properties, give or take.
Thanks. Director Grieve, you have another question?
I'm sorry, Chris, did you say 100 connections?
Yeah, give or take. Yeah, in that ballpark, depending on whether, for example, whether Curtis Road participates or Brent Road.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they're in that neighborhood.
Mm. And of course, I'm interested in what's going to come out of the feasibility study report, because this ticks all the boxes for grant funding. So it looks like it could be, possibly a win-win for everybody on this. And if it is a win-win, would Crota Beach be far behind? Thank you.
Thanks for that comment. Any other questions? Hearing and seeing none. So on receipt then, all in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And we have a requested action.
I'll move it.
Moved and seconded. Any comments on moving forward with the feasibility study? Hearing and seeing none. All in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. And we have a new item on the agenda for Local Government Leadership Academy feedback for receipt. Moved and seconded. And thank you for this, allowing this to be discussed here. I thought this was an opportunity for directors to maybe bring up any ideas that sprung up, and it's LGLA, but also AVICC. We've just come back from a couple of conferences where so much was discussed. And I thought if there were any ideas that were percolating to the top, that this would be a good time for discussion. So I see Director Arbor's lights on.
Yeah, thanks. I feel like a municipal councillor with their monthly reports.
Right. We
Where
don't
they
get to
all
do those.
that, and we don't do those at this committee, but I thank the chair for bringing it up. And you're right, when I saw LGLE, it was AVICC as well. And it was good to see everybody in person and be able to have side chats. The first thing I would observe is all three of the resolutions submitted by the Comox Valley Regional District at AVICC pass almost unanimously. The ship breaking, I think, was 150 votes for and 1 or 2 against. And then we had the highway stops and the construction waste that were basically in the consent resolution and passed easily, with some discussions actually around it, a lot of support for the construction. LGLA was just last week, I guess. And I guess the one thing that really stood out for me was the First Nation session led by John Jack and Ken Watts Jr., who's the new chief for Tsayshot, was there. And there was some really good discussion around the partnership and the interplay between regional districts and municipalities. And Ken Watts made a statement that made me smile at one point, where he said, a lot of our future and our reconciliation framework is really truly enabled by water and sewer, right? Where that core infrastructure and those partnerships are seen as the key. So it obviously made me think about our situation and our efforts with Comox First Nation in regards to the Southlands. Yeah, a lot of different workshops, a lot of different sessions. The only one I would underline too for me, which was great, was around housing, where there was a fairly 50-50 resolution that hit the floor of AVICC, but then it recurred at LGLE, which was all about the fight you're seeing in the media between Minister Eby and municipalities. And we end up with a late resolution to basically tell the ministry to back off the powers of local government. And I went to the mic and I actually spoke in favor of not shutting the door to those discussions. I used the term that we always get downloaded responsibilities, and that this is one of the rare occasions where the province proposes to upload powers by basically overruling municipalities around affordable housing permits, permitting processes and such. So we ended up landing on 50-50, but an excellent discussion. There was like probably 10, 15 speakers at each mic. It was very, very lively. And then at LGLE, in a similar vein, BC Assessment presented their the last few months of sales, which we're still seeing. They were reporting on like 15% increases in values just over the last 2 or 3 months. I did ask a question about whether we should think about expanding BC Assessment's mandate to actually do forecasting and modeling, because what's lacking in the Minister Abbey and UBCM's discussion is data and forecast and modeling of different policies on housing and how it could impact our interest rates. Like, we're all talking in a vacuum and we're just pointing fingers. They believe that municipalities and local government are not approving enough projects, and municipalities and local government are like, you know what, we are balancing supply and demand. The problem is the valuations and people buying second homes and foreign investors. But what I was saying is BC Assessment's nowhere in there. Like, they have all the professionals that take so much time trying to understand valuation, but they're not, and they admitted, right, that they don't have economists. They only have property appraisals. So anyways, a lot of housing, what I found was really stimulating housing discussion. So thanks, that's me for my little report.
Great. Thanks for that, Director. And Director Grieve.
Yeah, very interesting. It's always good to get together after all these years and kind of pick up the pieces where we left off. And I did attend the electoral area forum function of the LGLA. And some of the things, of course, you know, that are experienced by the other electoral areas is quite unique for the municipalities. And I'm quite fed up with municipalities right now, so you don't need to go there. So I paid more attention. Some of it was around Recycle BC. And of course, it is a challenge in remote areas. It's cost an awful lot to recycle. And although the market is coming up again, it was down, but of course, with metal prices and stuff, it's going up a little bit. But, you know, we got the same kind of a message that we had at our solid waste board. You know, one of the things was they're going to be taking in single-use propane canisters, which is great. Probably a better use for that would be to actually be able to refill them, because in Mexico you can refill them, but Canada we can't trust people to refill them apparently. Talk about the rural blue box system and green organics. Much the same information we had with the garbage composition report. When you look at the rural waste, 30% organic, 35% recyclable, that leaves about, you know, roughly 35% that's actually destined for landfill. So in other words, 1/3. So when we look at our new cell coming up in this ever increasing budget, is around 12 million now. We could save $24 million just by doing rural recycling, folks. And if we picked up organics as well, like they do in Regional District in Nanaimo, which they've been doing for years there. So, I mean, that's a big takeaway, that people realize that it doesn't just go away. It costs a lot of money. The other thing, you know, the big thing was remove unattended facilities. So unattended depots, get rid of them. We've already gone through that. So we realize that there's so much waste, one little bit of contamination, and you can't sell a product. The big thing, I think, was education. You got to keep educating people. Maybe keep educating the school kids, so the school kids can educate their parents. A lot about active transportation. Jesse and Kate from MOTI, double the trips by 2030 of active transportation. they seem to be, ministry seems to be looking more towards the benefits of separated pathways and cycleways and what have you, not just lines on the road anymore. Mental and physical benefits, air quality benefits, tourism opportunities, it checks all the boxes. But what I'm realizing more and more in my elected career is that policies don't necessarily change when governments change. They change when senior bureaucrats retire. So it's one of those things where there's now a lot of movement at the top echelons of the ministry. But then we heard stories from people in the field where their local managers say, we don't want bicycles. We don't want people walking on the roads. Obviously, they're getting very close to retirement and they really don't care if they're going to get promotion at that point. So, you run into that loggerhead of that, I call it that mid-level, just say no bureaucracy that exists not to do anything. So, and yeah, a lot of talking about bike to work week and e-bikes, no PST, things like that. So, I mean, it's a new world coming up and e-bikes going to be a really big part of it. And of course, I think that the ministry is realizing they're not just the ministry of cars anymore. But we'll see, because these are bright young things with all these ideas. We'll see how this actually pans out over the next 5 years. One of the other things, oh yeah, Emergency BC. So I did talk to Jesse and Kate about our situation in the rural areas. And in particular, we have that little stretch of land on the One Spot Trail between Macaulay Road and Ham Road in a situation where, it's very important that the residents have a egress, degress in case of wildfires and other natural disasters. So I was just wondering, is there any money available for that from, if I pitched it on the side of active transportation? And they steered me more towards Emergency BC. Apparently, there is a grant administered by UBCM that is called a CEPF program. I'm sure staff's all aware of this, but when I explain the situation, the Plateau Road area up past the highway, there's really no escape. And they said that there's possibly funding there, although it was 6 times overprescribed the last time it was released. But at least there's something. I was fishing around for something there that would fit, whether it's on the the active transportation side or the emergency escape route. And it looks like the emergency escape route funding for Emergency BC is probably the way to go, but it's through UBCM, so that's good. Otherwise, it's the same old blah, blah, blah. We'll see what happens in the next couple of years if things move forward. I know they've got some, they got some new blood. They've shaken up the ministries, as you know, that, I don't even know the name of the ministries anymore, so. And other than that, certainly it's all the chatter, the informal chatter after the official presentations. That's very important because you get to connect with your colleagues out there on the ground and hear what their challenges are. And it's just amazingly similar to the challenges we have at the regional district of the Comox Valley. Thanks.
Thanks, Director Grieve. I'll just point out 3 things, and it's interesting to note that we're all kind of hitting on maybe 3 separate or 3 very different reports. For me, what stood out for AVICC was the session on legislative reform. I mean, as regional districts, I know the directors around this table, we all have come up against these issues around the inability for us to control, fireworks, business permits. But even items came up around how regional districts had such trouble even handling some of the COVID recovery dollars. We don't have a function for things like that. And that reform is kind of coming up. It was a session that was led by Don Litstone. So, has some fairly hefty weight in terms of the legal side of things. But one of the caveats that was brought up was that if regional districts and municipalities, we move towards this legislative reform, we have to be careful around provincial downloading of without the tools and the resources, and the impact that might have on our bond ratings. And how through MFA, we currently get such a great rate because, we do this work and we have budgets. We don't, support negative budgets, and it goes a long way into how MFA provides us such great rates. So that was a bit of an eye opener. So I'll just pass that along to staff that this is at least being contemplated. Another thing that stood out for me, a bit of the chatter at AVICC around Ministry of Transportation, is that some of the regional districts mentioned that they actually meet quarterly with their MOTI local officials, and in some ways do a joint process around priorities. So I don't know if this is something that we can ask staff to look into, is if that's even a possibility here for us to not just receive a report from MOTI, but to actually be more participatory in how they come up with the areas and the priorities that they put forward. Director Arbor, do you have a comment on that?
Oh, you can finish.
Okay. The last thing then was just, again, as Director Grieve mentions, the chatter on the side is so important. I was able to have dinner with Leah Main, who's a director from Silverton, and she is also our FCM BC caucus chair. And I mentioned the issue around, our watershed service, or our contemplation of a service, but also just trying to support farmers and fish in the Solomon River watershed, having had those 2 reports done. And she actually mentioned that this sounded like a potentially good application to FCM's Green Municipalities Grant. That infrastructure, this type of water infrastructure, is something that municipalities would normally have, but that regional districts don't. And that because I told her about the frustrations of asking the provincial Ministry of Agriculture for funding for this, and she thought probably better to go up a level and ask for funding from FCM. So just a note on that. So back to you, Director Arbor.
Yeah, that's great. And you just reminded me that FCM is coming out with this new 4 thematics for the Green Municipal Fund for the coming years. We had our first presentation last month, and I think you're right. LMS watershed and stuff like that is in there, in natural asset management and such. So, and I do want, we're not going to relive the first week now. I can see why staff is not encouraging us to do monthly reports, because it's just bring back a lot of different things. On the active transportation and the ministry relationship, you're right. I think we ended up having a discussion of how there is no standard in the relationship between local government and the Ministry of Transportation across the province. So some regional district and municipalities seem to have an excellent, proactive, creative relationship, including the local officials, while others, it's inexistent. So we talked a little bit about whether that should be standardized in terms of the expectations between regional managers of MOTI and regional district. And we didn't just talk about things like active transportation. We were actually talking about subdivision approvals, all those different little sticky points that we felt there is no structure that is standardized across the province that was clear. And I would say that our experience here. I remember last year when Moti came and presented us, I remember asking a question like, when we bring forward our little requests or our list of elected officials, is it, is this something that drives your work? And their answer was basically, no, it's just nice to know, right? So that share prioritizing and what is the relationship, understanding they have the controls. But like you say, when we talk to people like the active transportation people that were there, much more interested. And they are linked with the climate secretariat and all those things. So you can see how some areas of Moti is really like, old days, but there's new ways. And the active transport people, their eyes, they were sitting at our table actually, and they're in charge of all the provincial pots. And their eyes really brightened when we mentioned how pleased we were to have completed our active transportation strategy. And, we're talking, okay, we've got 40 million in priorities and we don't have a service, you don't have. And then they explained to us as well how they budget internally, which is difficult for them because a lot of the budgets for these things sits inside their regional manager budget. And then it's kind of grant or internal tossing of money depending on the year. So we were talking about, if we're going to achieve our goals around the 40 million, like regional district, we need to have structures that actually can interact better so that we have some funds to put to the table. And also they are not fighting with a washout that costs them $1.5 million. And all of a sudden the regional manager doesn't have budget to do anything. So if we're going to be really serious about that, how do we create more stable funding, more predictable funding for things like active transportation? The last thing I'll mention, I promise, is a commitment. So I committed us for next term. So it's a soft commitment. But I was part of a climate thing and I was sitting at the table with Mayor Lisa Helps. And we came up with the next big thing, which is after social procurement, climate procurement, right? So we started talking about, in her case, collaboration between municipalities and regional district. Can we pool big purchases? So when it's time to build EV fleets and things like that, can all the municipality on Vancouver Island, can you pull that? We don't have the answer to that question. Staff probably already knows the answer, but is there economies of scale in working together? And second, on the climate procurement side, what will it take? So we all use Terrace, and we started to talk about how fast can we lead them to a transition. This morning, we're talking with the RCMP. We don't have as much, but how do you build really strong, ambitious climate targets into your procurement policies in addition to social procurement? So that was really cool. I committed to explore that. She's actually not running again. So the momentum will have to come from the kind of climate network around Vancouver Island, but that's something that I'd be excited to talk more about heading into next term. Thank you. That's all.
Great, thanks. Do staff need any formal motions for any of that to move forward, or we're going to work a little bit more informally on the MOTI meetings and whatnot?
Yeah, no, thank you very much for these ideas, and we've taken some notes, and we would appreciate the opportunity to meet with Moti more often. We do it at a staff level in the spring or thereabouts to ensure that our projects can work together cooperatively. We certainly do on a project by project basis as well. There's a committee struck to look at the conveyance project, which will include Moti. So we'll work away at them to get a better level of engagement at the political level as well, and certainly look into the FCM grant opportunities that you mentioned as well. So thanks for all this.
Okay, thanks. Any other comments? Director Grief?
This is something Arzia and I heard last night at the Solom River Restoration Society meeting, was that you basically need about 7,000 hectares of forest to even begin to sell it for carbon credits, and you'd be lucky to get $20 a ton right now. So I think the best way forward is to increase the price of carbon. And that way that the the market will rise to the occasion, because once there's a profit to be made, and even small stands of forest, if you can calculate it, right now it's very onerous, but maybe there's a chance that we can actually buy our own carbon credits here in the valley one day. But it's going to have to move a little bit from $20 a ton.
Thank you. On receipt then, all in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. So I believe we've approved all those addendums. We have a recommendation to move in camera under 91E of the community charter. Moved and seconded. All in favor?